Hi everyone, my name is Rachel Mascord, and this is part 3 of an unknown number of parts where I talk about important things in dentistry. And of course, not just in dentistry, but in the entire health of a human body, because really they're one and the same thing. If our mouth is out of balance, or if we have an excess of tooth decay or gum disease, those things are an indication that something is out of balance in the entire body. And it's funny that I need to say that. It should really, you think, be a fairly obvious thing. But as I think I described in my previous video, one of the problems we've got is at some point medicine and dentistry parted ways to a degree, to the point that we think about our mouths as being quite separate from our body. It's not surprising. If you've got a problem in your mouth, you go to your dentist. If you've got a problem in your body, you go to your doctor. And that's okay, and it's the way it needs to be for now, because if you go with a toothache to your doctor, they're not going to be able to do much for you other than prescribe you some antibiotics and some painkillers. But the problem comes because it creates a break or a division in our thinking, where we actually think of our mouth as something separate to the rest of our body. Now, that's a funny tangent I've gone off on, because what I was considering talking about today was, in fact, sugar. And we all know, particularly at the moment, the current climate in the media, there's a lot of negative talk about sugar, and a lot of very shiny, perky people talking about how they've quit sugar and they don't eat sugar anymore, and how fantastic they feel and how easy it is to do. And here's a book you can buy. I won't allow my concerns about that to get in the way of this presentation, but we now know, we're familiar with the fact that people are saying sugar is not such a great thing. We're getting more and more aware that it contributes to many, many disease processes. Diabetes is an obvious one. Heart disease is another one that's become more obvious in recent years. And there are concerns that sugar can increase the rate of progression of cancers and increase their tendency to metastasize or spread through the body. So sugar's getting a bit of a bum rap at the moment, and I think that's a great thing. It needs to. The problem is that when I go to my clinic every day and I ask people, okay, well, how much sugar is in your diet? How much sweet food do you eat? Most people say they don't have any sugar, or they have very little sugar. But that's not what the supermarket is telling me. When I go to the supermarket, I see a lot of heavily processed foods. I see a lot of foods that are sweetened. I see a lot of evidence that a lot of people are probably eating a high sugar diet, because I pretty much figure if there's a big supply of sugar, then there's a big demand for sugar. Someone's eating it. It's not sitting on the shelves going to waste. So, and this is, by the way, I want to make it clear, I'm not critiquing or criticizing people when they say they don't eat much sugar. The problem is we don't even know anymore what is much sugar. Like, what's a lot, what's a little bit, and what on earth has got sugar in it. We've got to the point we don't even really know what on earth we're eating, because there are a lot of foods that we assume are not sugary that are actually very high in sugar. So a classic example of that is tomato sauce or barbecue sauce. Those things are loaded with sugar, but we think of them as a savoury condiment. So these are the things that I like to kind of help people dissect and pull apart and start to make sense of, because we need to know what we're talking about when we say sugar. What is sugar? So we've got the obvious things. We've got the lollies, and we've got the chocolate bars, and we've got those really clear, obvious culprits. The sweet biscuits that we have for afternoon tea, or a piece of cake. We know that that's sweet, and it's pretty hard to fight that or deny those ones. How much we eat of them is another matter. But that's something that, for us to develop our own relationship with ourselves. So the more insidious forms of sugar are the things that we don't think of. For example, as I said, the tomato sauce. That's a sneaky one. That's one that, because it's predominantly salty and we have it with our evening meal, we don't consider it. Bread is another big one. And this is whether you have whole grain bread, whether you have sourdough bread, whether you make your own bread in a bread maker, whether it's gluten-free bread, it doesn't matter. Bread turns into sugar in the mouth. That's right, it turns into sugar in the mouth. Now, you don't have to take my word for this. You can do a little experiment. You get a little piece of bread, put it in your mouth, and leave it in your cheek. Just let it sit there. And what you'll notice after a few minutes is that your mouth is actually quite filled with sugar. And that's because when we have any form of bread, a grain, in the most common case wheat, but it can be rye, it can be oats, it can be rice, any grain, grind it up into a powder, and it's literally waiting to be turned into sugar very quickly. If you stick a whole grain in your mouth, it's a very slow process. Eventually it will turn into simple sugars, but not for many, many hours. But if you take that grain, grind it up into a fine powder, put it in your mouth, the enzymes in your saliva produced by your salivary glands actually convert that powdered grain, that powdered carbohydrate, into simple sugars very, very easily. And one of the big problems with bread is not only is it a little basically package of waiting to be turned into sugar, the other problem with bread is it's got a clinginess, it's got a stickiness to it, so it tends to hang around the teeth and get in between them and into the grooves at the top of the teeth. So even if you're eating a super low sugar diet, you don't eat lollies, you don't eat cakes, you don't eat snacks. If you eat savory crackers, like really bland ones, really boring water crackers, those sorts of things, even those that seem to have not much flavour at all, actually are little packages that will turn into sugar in your mouth. And they will sit there, beautifully releasing sugar into your teeth, and making the bacteria that cause decay very, very happy, which we don't like to do. We want them very unhappy. Now, the other thing this is where people start really not liking me very much, and where I get referred to as the world's biggest party pooper, is that another big source of sugar is fruit, and particularly fruit juice. Fruit juices are basically a problem because all of that lovely white stuff under the skin is gone. You don't have to chew it, and so you don't get the benefit of activated saliva when you drink juice. And when we chew, our saliva changes, it becomes active, and it likes to mop up acids and help undo some of the harm that the fruit sugars do. So the minute you put a piece of fruit through a juicer, you're actually losing the benefits of chewing fruit and the benefits of all of that white pith material that's under the skin, which is also quite a helpful thing in terms of reducing decay risk. And the other form of fruit that's a real problem is dried fruit. And this is where people really don't like me very much at all. And that's okay. I don't mind. I'm just interested in your health, not being liked. So one of the big problems with dried fruit is firstly, the concentration of sugar. If you take out water, you have more sugar. It's that simple. You strip out one thing, there's just more of everything else that's left behind. So basically dried fruit is like super, super concentrated sugar. It also is the tackiest, gluggiest, stuff you can possibly put in your mouth, and dried fruit is even stickier than bread. And one of the things I like to point out to my patients is that there's a good reason that Egyptian people were probably the first people in the world to do dentistry. And that's all of those damn dates they used to eat. And dried dates are a great example of how to make holes in your teeth. The other thing we need to be aware of, I'm just going to skirt away from fruit now. Oh, but before I go, actually, I do want to say it's possible to eat too much fruit. And there are times when I speak to parents and they're giving their children 6, 7, 8 pieces of fruit a day. And these are little kids. That's a lot of fruit for a little body. So look at that. If you do feed your children a lot of fruit, and because you want to do the right thing for them, what I'd recommend you do is rather look to substituting quite a bit of that fruit with vegetable sticks. So pieces of carrot, pieces of celery, pieces of cucumber, whatever your kids like. And if they don't like raw veggies, try and wean them onto the ones that they like the best. You know, very often carrots are a good transitional vegetable because they are quite sweet. And sometimes they're very acceptable substitute for kids. And they are sweet, but they don't have the same sugar problems as fruit does. So, having covered fruit, the other thing to be very careful of are commercial breakfast cereals. These things are a real problem. And one of the things I've heard it said is that if it's got the heart tick of approval, you need to avoid it like the plague because, again, when you have low-fat type breakfast cereals, you tend to find that there's an increase in sugars. Fat gives things flavour and bulk, and in breakfast cereals, what you then have are usually a lot of grains. So we're back to the bread issue. We've got grains that have been heated and treated and pulverized and flattened. Therefore, they turn into sugar more easily, plus they're often quite sweet. So one of the best things you can do if you like a grainy type of breakfast and you like carbohydrates, you're much better off to look at making your own breakfast cereals, making your own mueslis, or cooking, particularly in winter, something like quinoa, which is a fantastic grain and super high in protein. I'm not giving dietary advice in particular. I'm just giving ideas of things that you can look for that are a form of not substitution, but just different choices. Just opening the door to different things that you can do and different ways you can consider your diet. And then we come to sugar substitutes. And I just want to cover these briefly. And I don't want to really talk about the artificial sugar substitutes. A lot of people really quite like those or they hate them, very polarizing. What I wanted to talk about more are the things like coconut sugar, maple syrup, and agave. Because often when people are making that transition and they're getting away from table sugar, they often go to these sweeteners as their substitute. They become the go-to. Now, you have to use these things very astutely. And the fact is that all of those substitute sugars, be they maple syrup, agave, or coconut sugar, are actually high in sucrose. Sucrose is the worst sugar you can have. There's something about sucrose, and it's the table sugar that we're familiar with, the sugar we put in our tea and coffee. Sucrose has some magic capacity to set off mouth bacteria, and it helps them liberate a lot of energy. It helps them form that white sticky plaque that clings to our teeth that dentists like to clean off and like you to clean off with dental floss. So without sucrose, we don't get tooth decay. It's really interesting. If we get rid of sucrose, tooth decay is dramatically reduced. Yet these substitute sugars, so-called substitutes, or the things we use as a transition sugar, are actually very high in sucrose. So, I know that's not really a great message that people like to hear. The thing that I find those sugars useful for is they're not as sweet as table sugar because they've got other things in them. So they can help you transition, but they're not a long-term answer. They are a short-term support and nothing more than that. So I've delivered a lot of bad news there, but it's not really bad news because to me the bad news is the fact that we keep wrecking our teeth with our diet. That's the real bad news to me. And a lot of these foods give us a nice sensation for a few minutes. They taste good. But not only do they cause holes in teeth, we now know, as I said earlier, we've got these other array of problems. We've got diabetes, we've got heart problems, we've got, these potential risk in terms of cancer, not causing cancer, but increasing the rate of growth of cancers. To me, I'd rather have the bad news, the so-called bad news, and then start to make some different decisions in terms of how we eat. Start to look at our food in a different way, not be so dependent on manufacturers to do the right thing, not trust that label when it says healthy, because no one has the interest of your health and your well-being more than you do. A lot of these products are designed because they taste good and they make a profit. And I mean, let's be honest, that's what those companies exist for. They are in business to make a profit. And unfortunately, sometimes they're willing to make that profit in a way that's not particularly supportive of our health, the health of the people that are buying those products. So if you are someone that has what you consider to be a low sugar diet, but you're still getting some holes in your teeth, then I hope that today's talk will give you some other things to look at, to start to reconsider how much bread you're eating, how much fruit you're eating, to start to really consider what you're putting in your mouth and the impacts that it's having in your body. And after all, isn't that really what we need to be doing? Is not just fixing problems, but starting to backchain, to start to step back and take a wider perspective on how we're living and how we're treating our body. In my next presentation, what I want to talk to you about is what are the things that make us eat so much sugar? What's going on there? And to start to, again, take that bigger perspective and to start to consider that there's more to eating sugar and more to reducing sugar than having a lot of willpower. Anyway, it's been really lovely to share this with you, and I'll be back soon. Bye now.